Good morning. Just before coming up here, I was talking to Dave, and I said, you know, Dave, I'd be much more comfortable if I could talk about hyperthermic intraperitoneal chemoperfusion for peritoneal carcinomatosis. And in a very Arbinger-esque way, he said, you know, Laura, as long as it doesn't make anyone sick and it relates to the box, that will be just fine. No, but really, I'm actually really excited to share my Arbinger journey with you today. One thing that I swore I would never do as I was growing up was be a doctor. My father, let me start first. Are there any physicians in the room? No, a handful. Right, and there's a surgeon, we know. Dr. Captain Jason Wu is a surgeon as well. But when I was growing up, my father went to medical school much later in life. And so I was older, and I had a real understanding of how much time and effort he put into becoming a doctor, all the studying, the nights on call, away from family events. And I just thought, there is nothing worth working that hard for. There just isn't. I just couldn't imagine it. And so I majored in German at a small liberal arts college in northern New England, and my life's ambition became to teach German in a small liberal arts college in northern New England. And so the summer before I was preparing to get my PhD in German, my father and my mother, who's a retired operating room nurse, had an opportunity to go to Haiti and to volunteer with a group of surgeons down there. And they invited me to go. And words really just can't describe the experience that I had down there. There's nothing like being thrown into an operating room, and I use that term very loosely, in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere with no medical background. The poverty was overwhelming. The spirit of the Haitian people was amazing. But what inspired me the most on that trip, even more than the surgeries that were performed by the surgeons that were there, was the way my father took care of the patients. He spoke and it wasn't his technical expertise. He spoke no Haitian Creole. None of the patients spoke English. And yet, using just his eyes above his mask and a very calm and gentle voice, he was able to put people at ease as they were preparing for surgery that they really had no idea what they were getting into. And it was in that moment, as I watched him do that I said, that's why it was worth it. All that time that he spent at the hospital, all the studying he did, all the nights on call, it was for the privilege of caring for another human being. And it was in that moment that I decided, you know what, I want to be a doctor and I want to be a surgeon. And I want this privilege to be able to care for people. So 5 years later, I was so excited, I finally made it to my surgery rotation as a third-year medical student. And this was really important because I knew I wanted to be a surgeon, and so I was like a sponge, and I was working really hard. I had to prove myself to be worthy and capable of being a surgeon. And you know, all these years later, if you were to ask me what I learned on that rotation about anatomy or the indications for surgery or how to take care of people after surgery, I probably don't remember anything that I learned as a medical student, but I remember 3 things that I learned about being a surgeon and about surgery. And the first one was what we call the ABCs of surgery. And if anybody knows anything about medicine, you probably know that the ABCs usually refer to airway, breathing, and circulation. Those are the 3 most important things for saving somebody's life. But that's not what they stand for in surgery. In surgery, it stands for accuse, blame, and criticize. And the next thing that I remember the most was that you trust no one and expect sabotage. And the third thing is surgeons may sometimes be wrong, but they are never in doubt. And so they could have just put up a sign that said, "Welcome to the box." And it's no secret that surgeons, are notorious for let's call it an inward mindset, right? Certainly Hollywood has benefited from that, as you can see. But the people who haven't benefited from that are the patients. And it was just a few years ago that I was seeing a cancer patient in the clinic. She had to come see me because her chemotherapy catheter had gotten infected and it needed to be removed. And when she came into the clinic, the skin over the site was all red. The catheter was exposed. There was pus coming out of it. It just needed to be removed. So we removed it in the clinic. But because of the extent of the infection, it was not something that I could just close safely. And so I had to pack the wound with some gauze, and she was going to need to have this dressing changed at least twice a day. And this was on a Friday, so I had to make arrangements for a nurse to come and see her and help with that. And because it was going to be a weekend, I made very explicit instructions about how I wanted this wound managed. And we got that all arranged for her. And then on Monday, I was busy doing a long surgery, and I was tied up in the operating room, and I finally got to check my email. And there was an email from my administrative assistant that said the visiting nurse had called. She had gone to see the patient, and she had switched the dressing that you had ordered. And she wants you to know that she's a wound care nurse, and she wants you to call her directly. Now, for a surgeon who's been living in the box for 23 years, this message was not very well received. And I can still recall the conversation that in my head, and it went something like this. Oh, no, 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 no. I don't know who this woman thinks she is. She may be a wound care nurse, but I am a board-certified general surgeon and a surgical oncologist, and I'm board-certified in hospice and palliative care. I specifically wanted that dressing done a certain way, and the only reason that she's switching it is because she's lazy, and she's only going to have to see the patient 3 times a week. And what does she call her back? What does she think? I'm just sitting around. I have time to make extra phone calls? Oh. It just so happened that I was in the operating room. The resident that I was working with was going into plastic surgery. And so I thought, well, plastic surgeons know all about wounds, right? So immediately, this young resident who's 2 years out of medical school is a wound care expert. And I go over to her and I say, can you believe I just got this message and this person wants to use this dressing? Would you ever use this type of dressing in this kind of wound? And she said, no, that would be so stupid. And I'm like, I know, right? And so here I am getting an ally from, somebody who's 30 years younger than I am and only 2 years out of medical school. But so, I'll admit, I did not call the wound care nurse back. I emailed my administrative assistant and I said, I want to see this patient tomorrow in the clinic. Even though it's not my clinic day, I'm going to see this patient on a day that's not my clinic day. So the patient comes in, I have to admit, the wound actually looked really good. It looked really good. And the patient pleaded with me. She said, can we just keep using this new dressing? It's so much less painful, and I only have to change it a couple of times. And I was like, of course. But do you think I was happy about that? No. It was about 4 years ago that I discovered Arbinger after reading Terry Warner's book, Bonds That Make Us Free. And so I just want to put this out there. You really have to be careful about what books you read because they can really change your life. But I read that book, and through that I discovered Arbinger, and I went to my first Arbinger workshop down in Washington, D.C. with Cameron Cousins, and both the workshop and Cameron were just absolutely amazing. But what really inspired me the most during that workshop was just how foundational the Arbinger principles are to medicine. Simply put, they really define humanism. And when I left that workshop, I went back to work. At the time I was at the University of Massachusetts, and I just was trying to apply these principles in my own life and in my own clinical practice, and I really just had this burning desire to share it with my students and my colleagues. And so the students I had easier access with, and so I developed a little program that I called the Anatomy of Humanism, playing off of the Anatomy of Peace. And basically what I would do is I would meet with the third-year medical students that were rotating through surgery, and we'd meet for an hour once a week. And I would always start the sessions in the same way. I'd ask them, what is humanism? How do you define humanism? And once they got going, we'd start making a list, and I'd write it down for them. And ultimately, group after group after group, they all came to the same conclusion. It's about seeing people as people. And from there, we would start to explore what that means. We'd talk about what it means, is it important? Why is it important? Who does it impact? How does it impact us? What does that look like? And this resonated very deeply with them as they were starting to be involved in the box of medicine and surgery. And invariably, they would always tell me, who really needs this are the residents and the faculty that we're working with, And I said, yeah, it's easy to see everybody else's boxes, isn't it? And so the other place that I thought this would be that I really wanted to apply the Arbinger principles was in the perioperative setting. So the operating room is really a cesspool of boxes, I got to tell you. We've got operating room nurses, you've got anesthesiologists, you've got surgeons who are all coming together to provide safe surgical care for a patient. And they're often coming together for the first time as a team, sometimes never having worked with each other before. And each group has its own set of rules and policies and its agenda. And as you can imagine, especially when the stakes are high, things can get a little tense after a while at times. And there's also an unspoken hierarchy, and I'll let you guys figure out who thinks they're at the top of that hierarchy. So, again, I really wanted to bring it to the perioperative setting. And I won't go into the details, but after about 4 years of handing out numerous copies of Leadership and Self-Deception, talking to numerous leaders in nursing, anesthesia, surgery, and in the C-suite at the hospital, and with a lot of heavy lifting from Mike Renner from Arbinger, who actually came and gave 2 surgical grand rounds. I'm happy to report that at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, they have just recently trained 26 Arbinger facilitators and will be rolling out Arbinger across about the perioperative setting, which will cover over 300 people who will get the training across the whole spectrum of the perioperative setting. And so while I'm not there anymore, I'm really excited about